I'm going to make a foam helmet, specifically a helmet out of EVA foam or ethylene vinyl acetate. It's the same material that is commonly used in foam floor mats, the kind that look like puzzle pieces you may have in your classroom or at home. I downloaded a pattern from a prop website I followed a long time, and I have modified that so that I can use the laser cutter to cut out my pattern. After all my pieces are marked out, I'm going to use a knife to cut them out very carefully. Once the pieces are all cut out, I'm going to use a heat gun to heat form this foam, where I heat it up and then I'm going to bend it into shape by hand and then let it cool so that it holds on to that shape. It doesn't have to be perfect right now because I'll have plenty of chances to form it throughout the process, but by doing this I can go ahead and bend these flat shapes into shapes closer to how I need them to be for when I glue them together. Speaking of glue, that's the next step. There's a lot of pressure in these little cans, as I discovered rather surprisingly the first time. I'm going to use a neoprene contact cement to glue everything together. You can brush or rub this material onto both surfaces that you want to glue together, and then you need to wait for several minutes for it to dry or cure, and then you can press it together. You don't need to push all of it together at one time. It actually helps to press just a small amount, like on the edges, together. That way, if you have to make any adjustments, you can do that. If you just stuck each piece together, you would have very little room to move around without destroying the foam. After gluing enough individual pieces together, I'm left with two large sides of my helmet, and I'm going to put those together now. After gluing the sides together, I just have a few more details to add, and I'm all done working with foam. I'm going to try something and use a household sealant to fill some of the gaps that were left between the pieces of foam. After my sealant is applied, I'm going to use black spray paint to prime this helmet. Priming is effectively putting on a first layer of paint and creating a base layer that your other paint will stick to better. After it was initially primed with the black spray paint, anywhere that I use that caulk has a kind of shiny, smooth look, and I want to try and erase that and make everything look as clean and uniform as possible. Several coats of gray primer later, we have a pretty clean helmet ready to be painted silver. For that, I'm using a chrome metallic spray paint. Metallic spray paints can be a little tricky to get right. It's very easy to use too much or to use too little, so you have to kind of play around with how far away to keep it from what you're painting. Once the spray paint is done, it has a very clean, uniform look. But that's not the look that I actually want from this helmet. I want this to look a little bit more like it has been used or lived in, a little bit more weathered. So to achieve that, I'm going to mix up a few kinds of paint and water so that I can brush kind of a wet paint mixture into different cracks and recesses on the helmet, and then use a wet cloth to try and remove as much paint as I can get out.
It can be tempting when you start doing this sort of aging, if it looks good, to kind of go a little crazy with it on your models, on your props, and be like, well, I'm going to just go all over and do everything. And there's a lot of areas on this that any kind of wash like this that's darker would go into and be difficult to get out of and not look so good. Any of the lines that are visible where I put pieces together earlier are a good example of that. They would look like, I have kind of a grid of dark lines on my helmet, and I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to just be going around this like crazy, hitting every single line. I really just want to get certain details on this, like these edges along the ridge line of this helmet.
This process takes a little while. In some areas I went over several times, adding more and more dark to the mix. After I darkened some areas, I went back with some silver paint and even a silver Sharpie to highlight different parts of the helmet. Once I finished detailing the helmet, the last step is to put in the visor. The visor was one of the more challenging parts of the helmet. Once installed, the helmet is complete and ready to protect me from any stormtroopers that invade the workshop. The helmet is downstairs in the workshop, and as always, you are welcome to come and take a look.